Morning. Feel free to stand up and stretch if you feel like it, if you know. So I had a plan here to go through some frameworks and talk about how we're leveraging those frameworks to understand this transition to skills-based organization. But in listening yesterday and today, I thought I may take a different approach. I'm going to try to run through this very quick and then open it up to see if we can have a conversation about skills. I was talking to Alan this morning about it, and it's incredible how similar our journeys are. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about our journey to start, and hopefully it resonates. We started, Aaron, you talked about this. Is Aaron here? Aaron talked about this yesterday. The kickoff for our transformation was around 2016, 2017. We looked at our HR ecosystem, and we realized we had something like 14 different HRISs across the company. We had SAP, we had JDE, and that seemed like an opportunity to optimize and simplify. And so we started down that journey in early 2017. And by 2019, we had moved to a single HRIS, which was a pretty impressive feat. That was not perfect. We did have good project managers, and we did have crazy levels of documentation. We documented everything to the nth degree. I think where we left opportunity on the table was the expectations that we were setting by simplifying into a single HRIS. And so we thought that by doing this, we were going to fix every problem. Or that's what we said, right? And so a year later, we've implemented this one thing. We now have the wins that we hope to get from standardizing. We have common frameworks, common workflows, a single data foundation. But there were other things that were not fixed, right? The interface, clunky, it's a nice way to put it. The workflows were not necessarily frictionless. Somebody used the word frictionless yesterday, and I loved it. And the ability, the promise to understand our talent wasn't quite there. We had moved into a single system, but our processes to understand people had not changed. So that brought in the second phase, I guess, of our transformation. Which was focused on what were the critical areas that we needed to understand our talent better. Chevron is, by headcount, not a large company. We're about 38,000 people, employees, and about twice as many contractors. We have some pretty complex ways of doing business with operating ventures and non-operating ventures. Many of our competitors are partners in some of our major projects. And so we are at times limited to the level of visibility we have into the people that are doing the work. So how do we understand our talent better, regardless of where that talent comes from? Employees, prospects, contractors. And so what we did was we broke this down into two. The first thing, the way we're set up is we're set up in what we call product lines or programs. The first program that we looked at was learning and development. It was one of the areas where we were hurting the most, and one of the areas where the transition to that single system was really not paying dividends. We had a pretty good LMS now, but we didn't have an experience for learners. So we looked at a few providers of different types of technologies, learning experience platforms, learning record stores, and we started building an ecosystem that would be more customer-centric. So we brought in an LXP. We started aggregating the 27 different sources of learning information that we had in the company, and we're in a better place. That was still siloed to L&D. The next step that we took was in relation to talent acquisition and talent management. And that's where we found sort of the skills rabbit hole. Because when we were looking at a TA, we realized that we now had an applicant tracking system that was strong, but we didn't have candidate relationship management capabilities. Started looking at that. We looked at the usual suspects, the vendors that are HRIS recommended. But then we looked at other smaller, what seemed to be like AI-first companies. And their unit of data was skills. And what they were promising was, we can help you find the people that have the right skills, and we can do that with the information that you already have. And so, let me jump here. There we go. And so we started saying, okay, let's try to look at the CRM space. Let's try to figure out what you can do for us here. Their promise was, we're going to match people to the jobs that you have. And everybody here has heard that. Siemens talked about it yesterday. And we were like, that sounds pretty cool, right? If we can actually make it easier for an applicant to not go through our career site and figure out if they're a software engineer 1 or 2 or 3 or intern, but we can rather tell them based on the information that they volunteer, that's pretty powerful. We tested that. It seemed to work fine. The levels of accuracy we tested as well, and that seemed to work fine. Then we said, okay, how is that matching happening? How are you guys going through that matching? Is it just linear matching? Are you looking for keywords and finding people? Are you actually using foundational technologies that can allow for complex matching, neural networks that can look at and parse the information in the right way? And they were. So some were not, some were. And so we said, well, where else can we apply that, right? And so if we're applying it to external candidates that only volunteer a very small portion of their information, why couldn't we use that for our people? We have troves of data on our people that we aren't really using. We're relying on, we pride ourselves on being a relationship company. And so we're relying on relationships to know our people, right? And so we went back to some of these foundational frameworks that we've been using in relation to jobs in the past. And we started saying, okay, how can we use these things to understand the skills opportunity? So the first thing that we looked at was a supply and demand. You look at a job market, you think of the supply and demand for jobs, right? And do you have the right people? And if you have openings, how are you going to fill them internally, externally? If you have a major project, do you have the right people with the right project management skills or whatever it may be to fill that role? Do you have the right mentors and the right sponsors to be able to grow your folks, right? When you shift the conversation to skills, the questions are different but very related, right? They are, do you have the right skills to execute on your business? And will you have the right skills to execute on your business in the future? Well, that level of granularity is hard to get to. In the jobs reality, you need a job architecture, you need a job catalog, you need job families. For companies like ours, it's practically impossible to keep those things updated. With skills, however, what you get is you move to a different flow of data, right? We're in oil and gas and in energy, we're very familiar with real-time flows of data. We use PCN and SCADA systems out on our fields, and so we track in real time how a well is operating, how much different types of liquids it's consuming and spewing out, and how do we track emissions and things like that, and we do that in real time. The idea was, if we could do this for our people in real time, this idea of updated job architectures and catalogs and the relationships, the skills and competencies becomes a little bit easier. So we used this framework and we looked at both sides of the supply and demand. And we started with demand because these questions I mentioned are what an organization wants to know, right? And so we looked at, okay, from a demand perspective, what are our emerging lines of business? For Chevron, there's, I'm going to say, three vectors of change that have been pretty important in the past few years. The first one is the energy transition. So we have put up new lines of business to make sure that we're part of the solution. The focus is on new energies, and so we're looking at hydrogen, we're looking at carbon capture, we're looking at offsets and emissions. Then the other, I would say at this point, more important line of business is how do we reduce our carbon emissions from the existing operation? And so do we have the right skills to do that? And how do we even know if we have the right skills when we've never done that business? So that's one of the aha moments that we realized here is we need skill systems that allow us to look inside and outside. The vectors of change are usually coming out from the outside these days. We also looked at, like I said, open jobs, internal projects. Do we have the right subject matter experts? How can we identify what we call hidden jewels, right? And so we had use cases, particularly with this new energies organization, where we needed skill sets that were unorthodox for us. And so we needed people like geologists or petroleum engineers that understood crypto, that understood blockchain, that could understand things that you normally don't ask of a PE, right? How do we find that? Other than asking somebody if they know somebody, right? And with the bias that comes. Transition management, we also pride ourselves on being a company that offers a career. And so we have a good portion of our population has been in the company for 20 years, 30 years. I have people that in my teams that have been there for 40, 45 years. And so how do we make sure that we capture that knowledge? How do we make sure that as they transition out, we are capturing what they learned? And what are the skills that they've developed? Sorry, I did this. What are the skills that they've developed with time? On the supply side, like I mentioned, we had these active sources of data that we'd been looking at, resumes, assessments, profiles, certifications, right? But we also realized as we started looking at skills that these are proxies for skill data. There's a company called Credly. They're very large when it comes to certifications. I think they're the largest in the US. When you look at their platform, you look at the certifications that they provide, and they actually expose the metadata behind the certification. And the metadata is in the shape of skills. So if you look at any one of their certifications, they have between 5 and 15 skills that are tagged to one. When you look at resumes and job histories, what you're really doing is you are trying to equate what somebody went through with their ability to do the job. And you can do that with skills as well, or at least that was our theory. And then what we started looking at was also on the internal side, there are passive sources of data that we can take advantage of. People are working in systems. You were just talking about how people spend their time working through technology to be able to execute, right? And so in our case, we're a big Microsoft shop. We use Microsoft ADO, we use Microsoft Teams, obviously 365. And there's an underlying sea of data that's going around in Microsoft that we can tap into to understand the skills that people have. So if we look at our GitHub repositories, for example, we can tell how many entries people have had, what type of languages are they using to code. And these are skills that they have that we can document, and those are passive sources that can be very powerful for us. And so as you start understanding this flow between supply and demand, you realize that it's very intricate. It doesn't work. It's a two-sided network. You have to have the demand to have the supply, and you have to have the carrot to make sure that your employees and your prospects are providing the real-time flow of data. So what I tried to do in this slide was show the interconnection between that user layer and the data layer. It is necessary for every skills use case, right? In this case, I'm talking about the talent marketplace. Talent marketplace, I think everybody here is familiar with the promise of a marketplace. In essence, a marketplace is just aggregating and exposing opportunities to your people, right? Opportunities that take different shapes. Jobs, projects, gigs, mentoring, whatever it may be, right? And so what do we ask from them? Tell us your data and tell us where you want to go. And we'll tell you what opportunities there are, right? As they do that, they're interacting with the data layer very, very closely, right? And we need them to do that. And so what happens is, this was the second aha moment. If you don't have a data layer, a foundational data layer that allows for that almost continuous interaction, and it's driven by the relationships among skills rather than your traditional rows and columns data storage, you're not going to be able to provide those opportunities effectively. You're going to provide opportunities that are generic, not what people expect, which is personalized solutions for their growth, right? And so we started understanding the foundational layer a bit better. We realized that this was a big differentiator amongst vendors. When I mentioned And so I mentioned the first aha moment from a technology requirement standpoint was AI-first open architectures. The second one was graph models that allow for AI, right? And so that was another differentiator amongst some of our vendors, right? Some of them were not doing that, and some of them are only transitioning to that just now, right? What we also started realizing as we were looking at the graphs that these people proposed was to what degree were they leveraging the relationships, the traversal queries that they could take advantage of to actually offer effective recommendations. And when we were talking to my peers in HR, my background is in IT, but I've been in like a spy in HR for the last 2 or 3 years. We realized that this wasn't connecting. Because when you say traversal queries to a GM of whatever, they tune out. And so we made a few examples like the one I'm showing here. This is just an example of one skill that is connected to adjacencies, right? And so you look at these nodes, you look at the vertices, and you start realizing that the graph itself is a good tool to answer some of the questions that they have. Like, how do you define skills? You define skills by contextualizing them, by looking at those adjacencies. So this was a way that we helped them understand that when we were talking about Java, we could be talking about coffee, or we could be talking about coding languages. And depending on, those proximities, right, we knew what the skill was. The same is true for another very important skill in our business called operations. So when you talk about operations in HR, you mean one thing, but if you talk about operations in drilling or PE, it's a completely different thing. And you can use your graph model to do that. You can also use your graph model to understand, quote unquote, potential. And what that means is if you look at the right-hand side of that little web, you look at Java, you look at the proximity with some of those adjacencies, and you start realizing that a person may or may have not volunteered that information, but they also may or may not have that skill, right? And so in the case of programmers, somebody may have in their system or in their resume or whatever that they're familiar with R and with Java, right? But they didn't say Python, and our job requires Python. So if you're looking at Boolean technologies, right, that person's out of the way. But if you all have a good foundational technology, you understand that if they know R and if they know Java, there is a very high likelihood that they either know Python or they can learn it, right? And so you open the aperture for the people that you're trying to bring into your organization and that you're trying to grow, right? It's actually more exciting if they don't know and they learn it, at least for them. And so that was the second aha that we had when we were using some of these frameworks. And so then we stepped back and we said, what does that mean for our organization, right? What does it mean for the systems and the way of thinking that we've been having in HR as far as our talent? And this is another very traditional framework that we went back to, the build, buy, and borrow framework for talent. And so we said, okay, normally, as you look at some of these, if you are thinking in skills, you understand that you can now build in a different way. If you have an LMS and an LXP that are connected to your skills foundation, you can actually target those skills much, much better. And you can volunteer those recommendations in real time, right? You don't have to, you will, but you don't have to rely as much on a supervisor's opinion of what you think you need to develop. And so that was the third aha moment of what we were trying to do here. We pride ourselves in being an engineering company, and the idea that we were equating the art and science of talent was something that we latched onto to convince some of our business partners of the value of this. We could now provide quantifiable data to support development of people, right? It wasn't just, my friend here saying, oh yeah, you're a hypo, or you're a gropo, whoever came up with that. And we need to develop you in this or that way. We actually have quantifiable data that can tell us what you want, where you are, what we want, and where we want to get you, and we can develop you like that. When it came to buy, I already went through the use case for how we can bring people in. And then the one that we are exploring more recently is the borrow one. Because like I said, we're twice the size in contractors that we are with employees. And we have limited visibility to those folks. So if we can get to know their skills, and we have great partners that are willing to volunteer that data, how can we learn more about how we're built up as an organization? What are those skills that we've outsourced? Are we okay with that? Did we notice, right? Where can we tap into potential in different ways? There's a interesting company that I've been talking to recently. We're not doing business yet. They're called, I'm just gonna say, they're called Catalant. And what they provide is a marketplace for consulting individuals, actually. So they have a bunch of people that are from your, Accenture, Deloitte, McKinsey, blah, 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 right? And they have a marketplace that's based on skills. And so if you have a need for consulting, you can tap their marketplace and you can find the skills that you're looking for on a consulting firm. And so these are things that we can't do today because we're learning the language of skills. But at some point, you can really bolster and get great visibility into the idea of that borrow lane that you're looking at there. So that has been our journey so far. Alan said yesterday, nobody has this figured out, and he's absolutely right. We don't have all the answers. We're still trying to understand the technology a little bit better. One of the things that's been really exciting is how we can bring in large language models like ChatGPT to accelerate this journey. So we had, I'll try to talk about this one really quick. We had this roadblock where our business wasn't comfortable with us moving to skills because we don't have good data when it comes to the demand side, right? And so are our job descriptions where they need to be? And what do they include the skills that people need to have to do the job? So what do? We partnered with one of our AI vendors. We used a ChatGPT API. We refined the model with some of our information. And we just told ChatGPT, hey, for our job descriptions, give us the top 15 skills that are required and then the top soft skills that are required. It did that, and so that problem solved. Solved, right? So it was just a means to show that there are going to be roadblocks in this journey. We don't know exactly how to mitigate those challenges. By the way, this vendor included this as a feature in their production. They're not in production yet, but it was part of a hackathon that we ran, and they're going to make it part of their offering, right? So it's still a journey, still learning a lot about it, but it was really useful to leverage existing frameworks, traditional frameworks with a twist. So I'll stop there and open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. You touched on it towards the end about people who just weren't maybe buying into it, or they're like, can you talk a little bit about that experience and then how you overcame those naysayers?
I have not. I lose sleep over it.
All right, next question.
We still have a lot of what I call headwinds to this transition. I think they come from they have different sources, right? So there was a question for the previous presentation about people's difficulties in doing their job with these new developments, right? And people just don't see what this means. And so people are also afraid. Like in Chevron, we have roles we call personal development representatives and people sponsors. And their job is to know people. They're supposed to know their function. Let's say we have a sponsor or a PDR for the IT function. That person is supposed to know the 2,500 people in IT and their skills. It's impossible. That is impossible, right? And so part of what we've been trying to do is we've been trying to explain that this is an augmentation of the jobs that they're doing. What we're really doing here is we're providing them the science side of the art and science. And they need to focus on their relationships. They need to focus on the capability of people. We can give them the skills, right? And so somebody may have skills, but are they even willing to use them, right? That's not something that this is going to answer for us. When we first started this, I was talking to Jesse about emotional intelligence, and I realized that one of the things that's been important for us with the people that we've bought over is that we have been very transparent about this idea of making sure that there's a human in the loop, right? This is not a decision-making solution, right? This is something that's going to augment our data so that we can make a better decision. The people that are not bought in usually have other concerns, whether it be organizational concerns, whether they see sort of the writing on the wall about the necessary changes to organizational structures and things like that. And so we've taken it one by one, but we're not out of the woods. Sure.
I'm pretty sure we're going to continue talking a lot after today, but one very curious question, either on the supply or demand, have you considered the proficiency levels at the skills, or just either, ones and zeros, you have it or not?
Yeah, that's a great, fantastic question, because we're starting to toy around with the idea of moving from this Boolean reality of do you have the skill or not, to how proficient are you with the skill. Normally, what you leverage to answer that question is assessments, right? You assess people on their competencies, on their skills, and those assessments may or may not be accurate, right? Especially if they rely on some other human. If I, as a supervisor, assess you today, but it was a bad day, it's going to be different than if I assess you next week. One of the things that we also realized with the graph models that we looked at was the idea, and with, by the way, our LXP vendor was critical in helping us understand this, the idea of skill signals, right? And so how you can signal that someone is actually putting a skill into practice. And what that means is, say you're wanting to learn about project management, and you take a class, and that's a skill signal. Let's say you take another class, that's another skill signal. Let's say you participate in a gig where you applied project management, third signal. Let's say you now take a job where you're a junior project manager or a business analyst learning about project management, that's a fifth skill signal. And so as you go through this model and as it matures, you can start actually documenting the skill signals that somebody has volunteered to the system. And when you get to a good number of skill signals, what you realize is you're really understanding if this person's using that skill or not. So it's not quite a replacement for assessments, particularly in the areas where we have high risk. And so there is going to be a need for assessments for some of those competencies. But there are areas where it's not that necessary. If I see that you have enough skills enough skill signals for communication, right? I don't really need to assess you on that. I just see that you're using it, right? Now, if what you are is an operator on the field, and you're the one that's in charge of closing that valve, we want to make sure you do it right, because that's a high-risk activity, and you're going to be assessed on it. So there's a balance between these two things. It's not an either-or when it comes to skills and competency assessments, and that's sort of where we're at right now.
Okay, so first disclosure, Luis is my boss, so hands down, this was the best presentation of the conference. This is going to be a lot of data, right? And I think to really make it a competitive advantage for any company, AI is going to be a key factor in that. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the responsible use of AI here, because in some cases, we may be trading one bias for potentially another. There's also the fear, right? The Terminator fear in terms of AI taking over and us completely relying on it. So you want to talk about that and it's getting more and more in the media? Yeah,
I think maybe the start of this is what you talked about, large amounts of data. Big differentiator for those companies that are AI first versus the ones that are catching on. And huge differentiator for companies that are closed-ended versus open architected. You look at some of the vendors out there, they're relying on a couple million sets of profiles to build the correlations across skills. And then you look at some of the other ones and they're relying in billions with a B of data sets, or I guess data entries to build those. It's a huge difference. If you look at the 15 million profiles that you have in your database versus the 1.3 billion profiles available to you out there in the world, you start eliminating some of the biases that tunnel vision creates of limited sets of data. But the other reality is we're figuring out, together with lawmakers, what responsible AI means, right? And the first step is to make sure that there's transparency in the AI, that you can actually understand how it's understanding skills. Yesterday we talked about the classification of skills. The skills that are declared by an individual may be confirmed, they may be not confirmed, they may be unreasonable in the sense that someone's saying that they have a skill that they don't have any evidence on. And so it's really important that you have that human in the loop to verify and decide on this information, right? So we've been talking a lot with the EEOC. We've been talking with some of our partners to make sure that we understand what is the legislation that is sort of defining responsible AI. And right now, what the way I will put this is we're taking baby steps when it comes to the assumed assessments that the technology is making and the transparency of the system to tell us how it progresses through a recommendation.
Can I ask you just a question, how to prioritize skills? Because how do you go about helping business leaders understand that behind their strategy, there are capabilities. Behind the capabilities, there are the different models of talents, including technology, including all that. How do you help them help you with emerging skills and the most high-value skills?
Yeah, that's a good question. What we've done so far is the way we look at emerging skills today is we rely on partners to tell us what they are, particularly when it comes to these external vectors of change, the energy transition, the pandemic, hybrid work. We are relying on experts we trust to tell us what those skills are. And I'm sure that they have quantified some of that based on their own benchmarking and what they're seeing with, from their vantage point. The part where we feel we can be a little bit more scientific is by leveraging a skills foundation that has access to public data. So if you start thinking about, okay, what do we look like, but what does the energy industry look like? And what do we have access through public sources, like the CIA fact book or our census data and some of the other, there's a wealth of information available out there that can show us where we are, where we're going, what are the benefits of these new lines of business that I was talking about, and then expose that data in real time to our leaders. Part of what we've noticed when some of those leaders rely on external vendors is that we just get generic answers. So what are the skills, the emerging skills that you need for a hydrogen business? Well, you need good communications, you need good project management, and you get 5 or 6 of those, and then we create a program to develop them. And what we're really looking forward is technical capabilities that will allow us to do a better job with retaining hydrogen emissions and things like that. So it really takes a lot of depth and granularity to be able to get into those answers.
This is a very interesting topic, and for sure we will have more conversations in addition to this. But my question goes also in line with the priority and the importance, because I have done similar exercises. The last one was about 10 years ago in the bank, and we ended up profiling or identifying so many technical skills that was not needed. Mm-hmm. So my reflection from that project is we need to look forward to the future to see what are the key skills that we want, and based on that, create the certification and validation mechanisms to foster credibility. Mm-hmm. Because that was another aspect that failed. Mm-hmm. People were complaining that supervisor didn't have the skills to assess, the employees were assessing more than what they really have. Yeah. And we went with certification committees, all of that. And that is my question. To what extent are you aligning with the incentives? What's in it for people to really declare what skills they have and to really develop those skills? Are people having more compensation, having the opportunities to do more challenging or interesting jobs, having opportunity to be promoted or not? Because if not, it's a deception for people to, okay, I have filled out all my skills, now what?
Yeah, I think so we have not implemented the compensation carrot in Chevron. And I think right now what we're looking at is it's the why. It's the why for the individual, right? What are you trying to do in this company, or how are you trying to grow? And we can tell you based on that aiming point that you have for yourself. That's as far as we've left it when it comes to motivation. There's more work to do there, but part of the reason why we haven't really touched the compensation lever is because we're still learning about this. We're not comfortable enough to start saying we're going to pay more for skills, right? I forgot the first part of the question, but that's kind of where we are. And then the other thing about skills, and I know we're way over time, is we did an exercise with one of our vendors where we took a particular role in the company. It was geologist level 1. We collected the data, the talent profiles from all of our geologist level 1s. We looked at their profiles. We parsed through those profiles. We understood the skills that those people in role had. And that's how we determined the foundational skills that someone needs to have to do the job today, right? So what we looked at later was, how do we transform this? What are the emerging skills in geology basics, right? To do that, we went external. And so we looked at the energy industry at large, and we started identifying of those skills that we had, which ones were emerging, which ones were declining. And that's how we adjusted what could be the offering or the job description for a geologist one. These are kind of the exercises that you have to do continuously. But if you don't have that data foundation to bring in those profiles, parse through the skills, and then look outward, you can't do it.
Let's give Luis a round of applause.
Thank you.
Nice job.